Have you ever noticed something strange about life? You say you want change, you say you want growth, you want more money, better relationships, a better life, but the moment you are actually trying to change those things, something inside you resists. You procrastinate, you sabotage. All of a sudden, you feel anxious, you feel tired, overwhelmed. And here's the question that most people never ask themselves: what if the thing resisting your growth is actually your ego trying to protect your current identity? Because your ego has one job, and that one job is not to make you happy. Its job is to keep you the same. Most people misunderstand what the ego actually is. They think the ego means arrogance. They think it means pride. But the ego is something much deeper than that. Your ego is simply the identity you have built about who you think you are. In the internal story that you say to yourself, typically sounds something like, I'm this type of person. I'm not good at that. I always struggle with money. I'm shy. I'm unlucky in love. And over time, this story becomes familiar. And familiar becomes comfort. And even when comfort is painful for you, because the ego doesn't like change. And here's something that is going to surprise you. Your brain does not prioritize happiness. Your brain only prioritizes predictability, because your nervous system is constantly asking one question: is this familiar? And if it's not, it's going to ask, is this going to improve my life? Or maybe it's going to ask, have I experienced this before? And if the answer is yes, your nervous system relaxes, even if the situation is terrible. This is why most people stay in bad relationships and bad jobs, continue doing habits that they know are not good for them, because the nervous system says, this might hurt right now, but at least we know what it is. That's crazy if you really think about it. Why would we stay doing something that is harming us? Now, here's one interesting thing. The moment you try to change your life, you're not doing something extremely threatening to the ego. You're challenging its identity because it has been protecting your current identity for years. So imagine someone who has believed for their whole life, I'm not good with money. And all of a sudden, they start learning about investing, building businesses, saving money. At first, it feels very exciting. But eventually, something is going to happen. They're going to start procrastinating. They're going to avoid learning. They're going to doubt themselves. And why? Why would we do that when we know that we're making progress? Because the ego starts panicking. Your ego sees change as a threat to its survival. Not because change is dangerous, but because the unknown is scary for it. The identity is starting to change, and the ego doesn't like that. So think about it. If you are no longer the person who struggles, if you are no longer the person who is insecure, if you are no longer the person who plays small, then who are you? For the ego, that question is terrifying, because the ego only knows how to protect what already exists. That's why transformation feels uncomfortable. You might think growth is supposed to feel inspiring all the time, but the reality is something different. Because growth feels more like identity instability. You start behaving differently. You start thinking differently. You make different choices. And all of a sudden, you don't recognize yourself anymore. This is the moment where most people end up quitting, because the ego starts whispering, go back to who you are. This is not us. This is so uncomfortable for me. Change. But here's the deeper truth that most people never realize. The ego is not evil. It's just outdated software. And at some point in your life, your ego formed that protective mechanism, maybe because it experienced rejection, maybe because it experienced failure, maybe because it experienced emotional pain. So your mind created strategies to keep you quiet, to avoid risk, to not trust people. And at that time, those strategies seem to help you survive. Because remember, the brain is going to try to keep you in survival mode if it deems that any situation could threaten your life. But survival strategies are part of the ego as well. And it eventually becomes your identity prison because you no longer have the ability to change because the ego doesn't want you because it feels threatened. So let me explain something very powerful. Your personality is not fixed, it's conditioned. Your habits are conditioned. Your reactions are conditioned. Even your emotional baseline is conditioned, which means something very important. If your identity was learned, it can also be rewritten. But rewriting the identity requires something that the ego hates, and that is uncertainty. Uncertainty for the ego is not pleasant. Most people try to change their life through motivation. They watch videos, they read books, they feel inspired for a few days, but motivation doesn't change identity. Motivation only creates temporary emotional spikes. Identity changes when behavior becomes consistent enough to create a new image of yourself, which means that you have to do something uncomfortable. You must act like the future version of yourself before it feels natural, and that makes the ego very nervous. That's why it's so hard to change. So I want you to think about the first time you tried to do something outside of your comfort zone. Maybe you tried public speaking. Maybe you tried to approach someone that you found attractive. Maybe you wanted to start a business. When you did those things, more than likely, your heart started to race. Your mind was filled with doubt. Your body felt tense. And most people, they tend to feel those things. And they give it meaning. And most people think that those feelings mean that they're not ready. They're not good enough. That whatever they're going to do is deemed to fail. But that's not what it means. You're just giving it a meaning to something that may not happen. What this actually means is that the nervous system is meeting on familiar territory. Your ego, more than anything, wants stability. But your potential requires expansion, and expansion always involves discomfort. Imagine a snake shedding its skin. For a moment, it looks vulnerable, exposed, uncertain. But if the snake refuses to shed its skin, it's going to stop growing. Humans are exactly the same. If you protect your identity too much, you suffocate the evolution. And if you want change, evolution is required. Now, here's where awareness becomes powerful. The moment you recognize the ego's pattern, you stop taking its fear personally. When you doubt appears, you don't say, I'm incapable. You say, my ego is reacting to change. When anxiety appears, you don't say, this is not for me. You say, this is unfamiliar, not impossible. This small shift in awareness changes everything for you. Because the real game of life is not external, it's internal identity management. Your habits create your behavior. Your behavior reinforces your identity. And your identity determines the life you experience, which means if you want a different life, you must slowly build a different internal self-concept, and that requires patience. It won't happen overnight. This is where most people get frustrated. They want instant transformation, but identity changes, they happen in layers. First, you become aware of the changes, then the choices, then the behaviors, then the self-image starts to change, and eventually life reflects the new identity. But the ego will resist every single stage of this process. So the real question is not, how do I get rid of the ego? The real question is, how do I stop letting it run my life? And the answer is surprisingly simple. You stop negotiating with fear, because fear is not compatible with who we are. You simply stop waiting to feel comfort, and you start experiencing discomfort as a signal of expansion. When something feels scary but aligned with growth, then you're actually moving in the right direction to meet the next version of yourself. And here is the irony. The life you want already exists in a potential, but the version of you who lives in that life is not the same person with the same identity that you currently are operating on, which means something very powerful. Your future is not blocked by circumstances, it's blocked by the identity that you have currently. And in that moment, when you start upgrading your identity, you begin to change everything. So the next time you feel resistance, the next time you feel doubt, the next time you feel like your mind says, this is too much, pause for a moment and ask yourself this question. Is this actually putting me in danger, or is my ego protecting me to retain the old version of myself? Because if it's the second, then you're probably standing right at the edge of transformation. And the only thing you have left to do is to step forward. So hopefully this helps you. Hopefully this helps you understand why the ego doesn't like change. And maybe now you can start making the necessary changes to avoid getting trapped by its identity, the identity of the old version of you, because you have a version of you that you have not yet met. So hopefully this helps you. Don't forget to spread the love.